What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Shane Seeley. You can follow me on Twitter at the Flex Network 1. Today, I'm joined, of course, by Brandon Adam. You can follow him on Twitter at Brandon E. Adam 19 and Mike Dickinson. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike_Dickinson. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today, very special show. We're going to be talking about Scott Fishbowl 12. Mike, you are graced, I guess, with the luck. You rolled the dice, baby, and you're in, baby. So we thought it would be appropriate because that's all we've been talking about. You've been doing mock drafts for the last few days. And first and foremost, I mean, man, how does it feel to make the tournament?
It's kind of crazy. I was in the satellite last year, and if you won your conference in the satellite, you got an automatic bid. I came in second in my conference. It actually came down to the last week, but I ended up coming in second. So, I got lucky. I got pulled this year, and I'm in the dance, baby. It's exciting.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. So Scott Fishbowl, I mean, it's pretty much it's become an industry thing, right? Like that's all you talk. It's all you see on Twitter. That's all people are talking about this time of year. The draft itself isn't until January or July 11th, so we still have a little ways to go. But it's kind of appropriate, I think, to go and dive in and let's be early here. Let's set the market on some strategies. And Brandon, how you doing, brother? Welcome back to the show.
Doing good. Yeah, just got back from LA, did the Disney thing with the kids and the beach stuff and seeing some family and catching up, and just got back. Actually, last night I got back Thursday from the trip, and then last night I was at the Stanley Cup Game 5, and so I'm a little tired, a little hoarse. I was a little depressed. I ate my feelings at In-N-Out Burger last night because we lost, and I feel like crap this morning from eating that burger. So now.
Is California Disneyland or Disney World? I always get
confused. Disneyland.
Okay. Disney World is the one in California.
The OG. It's the OG one. Disneyland. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's Disneyland for us fantasy football players. It's Scott Fishbowl 12, baby. And you know what, Brandon? The good news is you're not feeling great. The good news is I'm going to make you feel better today because we're going to have a pretty in-depth conversation. You ready for it? About idiot kickers. Because Scott doubled down this year. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Scott Fishbowl, first of all, just go Google it or check Twitter at hashtag SFB12. It's everywhere. The biggest thing is Scott likes to mix up rules. And for the most part, the rules this year are quite similar. We'll go through it just for some context for everybody. But one of the things is he likes parity at different positions. And so it's a super flex league. You can start a lot of different players and includes kickers. Okay. And this year the scoring for kickers, he amped it up, he doubled down, and it's going to be an important part, I think, of a winning team this year. But let's not bury the league. Mike, why don't you talk about, I don't know if you have the rules in front of you, but why don't you talk about just some of the interesting rules that Scott Fishbowl differentiates versus your standard traditional league?
Yeah. So, It is a super interesting league. First of all, if you're not familiar with it, it's a relatively large field tournament. So I think we're talking 2,500 teams this year, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the regular season runs 11 weeks. You got to navigate through your regular season. Playoffs start week 12, and then they taper down all the way to week 17. They don't run week 18. And by week 17, you're left with the top 1% of the field. And then whoever the scoring is kind of cumulative. It takes your average because they're bye weeks in the playoffs, it takes your average from the season and then adds weeks on top of it. So it's kind of a way to offset the fact that you're going to get jammed up with bye weeks in the playoffs. So it's super interesting. Looking at it's 6-point touchdowns all across the board. So passing, receiving, and rushing. Obviously 2 points for 2-point conversions. You lose 4 points for an INT. So you really want to go with it makes a passer like Jameis Winston a little less appealing in a setup like this, where he could throw for 35 touchdowns, but he could also throw for 25 picks. And in the satellite conference, which is where I was last year, I had weeks and my top two quarterbacks were Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. And I had weeks where Herbert put up negative points for me. Which was a tough pill to swallow. But I mean, it was. I ended up in a good spot. I ended up stacking. I stacked CD with Dak, and I stacked Mike. By accident almost. I stacked Mike Williams with Justin Herbert. So both in a best ball setting, which is what the satellite is, that worked out relatively well for me. You get bonus for being over 66.6% completion rate. You lose a half a point. You lose a point for an incompletion. You gain a half a point for a completion. So you want the more efficient passers. So again, the Jameses of the world, you might kind of beg off them. It also pushes up the Kirk Cousins of the world and the somebody like Tua who's going to be in a low volume but efficient offense. Rushing's nothing crazy. You lose 2 points for all fumbles, which is something that they added back in this year. It's a half PPR, so it's a half point per reception. You also get a half a point for first downs. Tight ends get an additional half point per first down and an additional half point per reception. So tight ends are full PPR and a full point for a first down. So you kind of want your chain movers. And we'll get into. I'm in round 13 of a mock draft right now that I've been going through. I found a community on Discord, and these guys run a podcast, and they've run. I think they're up to 23 mock drafts that they're doing now. This is a slow draft. I'm actually doing a live analyst mock draft on Sunday night on Discord at 10 o'clock. So that's going to be 30 seconds per pick. I'm interested to see how that plays out because it's the draft that I'm in right now. It's definitely, there's a couple sharp guys in there, but it's a couple guys that are, or girls, I'm not sure if it's guys or girls, that are trying to feel their way through it. So I'm interested to see how this draft I do on Saturday night plays out. The thing that's super interesting is the fact that, as a former high school and college kicker, I fully appreciate Scott making kickers relevant again. It's a point for any made kick, so a made field goal or a made extra point, but then it's decimal scoring thereafter. So if you make a 60-yard field goal, that is a 7-point play for kickers. So last year I had 2 or 3 kickers on my squad. I had Dan Carlson, I had Jake Elliott, and I had one other person. And Dan Carlson was extremely relevant for me most weeks. That ended up helping me out a lot. So in MFL, on the teams in the leagues and the conferences that are on MFL, you can flex your kickers in. You're not required to start a kicker, but the scoring setup makes it as such that you would want to start a kicker. The leagues that are on Sleeper does not give you the option to flex your kickers. So there's a kicker slot on Sleeper. So that's it in a nutshell. He's also talked about victory points this year. For those of you that aren't familiar, victory points, or if you play on Sleeper, it's wins against the median. I know, gentlemen, we have a couple leagues where we do that, and I appreciate it. You know, if you put together a monster and you just run into a buzzsaw every single week, at least it gives you some credit for that. So I like it. I think he said that, you know, if you can put together 12, 13 wins, basically a winning record in those 11 weeks, then you're almost guaranteed a playoff spot. So it's going to reward the teams that draft those monsters.
Right on.
Yeah. So I for all the leagues that I'm a commissioner in, for my dynasty leagues in particular, I had that scoring versus median every single week, because that does add a level of parity where, to your point, Mike, if you get a buzzsaw, and so especially with a tournament this large, it does make a huge difference. I think what's interesting is that a few changes this year. Again, we talked about the kickers. It's that additional extra point for making it. So if you're making a 37-yard field goal, it's not just 3.7 points. It's 3.7 plus that extra point. I think that's going to make a big difference, you know, especially when you talk about like Daniel Carlson, who for the Raiders, he had 40 made field goals last year. Like, that's 40 additional points over and above the actual yardage on those points. So I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. You also don't lose points for missed kicks.
You also don't lose points for missed kicks. And also a big change for the quarterback position. You don't lose a point for a sack. Last year, if you get sacked, you lost a point. So that was a huge determinant. It made a big difference for some of these players that would just sit in the pocket. Like Deshaun Watson obviously didn't play last year, but he was kind of notorious for holding the ball too long, and he got sacked a ton. The thing is, I mean, I never liked that rule, because a lot of the times when you get into the head of a quarterback, like Tom Brady, for example, more often than not, the reason he would take a sack is because he would rather hold on to the ball, take the sack, take the lost yardage, versus throwing up a duck. And it's just, when you look at like what's worse for the team, the sack is worse. Lose it down, move on. And I think that's just, I didn't love that rule. So I like that they've done that. As well as the playoffs, as you noted, Mike, it start in week 12 this year. Versus, I believe last year it was week 14 it started. And so 50% of all teams are going to join the playoffs this year. And you're not just going to go up against your conference. It's going to be against the entire tournament. So, and then it's going to be roughly 10% per week for the first 3 weeks are going to be off. And then it's going to be 15, 16, 17 are going to be where they really get down to it. So I think that's really important. But I got a real question for you, Mike. Where did the first kicker go in one of your mocks? Do you have that in front of you?
Like I said, I'm in 13 and a kicker has not gone yet.
I think that's a mistake. I think people are just sleeping on it. Honestly, I really do, because look, I think it's going to make a difference, and people are slow to adapt to these rules, and that's where we can get our edge, right? Because, look, we like to call ourselves fantasy nerds. I mean, Brian, you're like the cool kid in the class, and Mike and I are the two nerds. But look, we like to get into the details because the devil's in the details, and if you can go and differentiate your team, like Mike, you should go and we should. Well, I mean, figure out who you think the best kicker is going to be this year. If it's Daniel Carlson again, I mean, Matt Prater is usually pretty bang on. He finished as a 4, or as so not Prater, Justin Tucker. Yeah, he finished as a kicker. Yeah, as a 5th kicker off the board last year, or finished last year. But I think what's really interesting here is when you go and you look at all the different crazy, wacky rules that were put in place. If you just do a quick gut check and you go and you look at how players scored last year in a very similar format, if you look at the top, it's a lot of familiar faces. Josh Allen's of the world, Joe Burrow's of the world, Cooper Kupp's of the world. Jonathan Taylor was the highest scoring player in Scott Fishbowl last year because of things like first downs. Look, we can overanalyze, okay, this tight end's going to get so many first downs, but guess what? George Kittle, he's a staple in the San Francisco offense. So George Kittle's probably, because we like him in regular fantasy, he's probably going to be pretty relevant in the Scott Fishbowl. But are there any players that jump out to you, either you guys, maybe I'll go to you, Brandon, a player that jumps out to you that you're either out on that you would normally like, whether maybe it's a quarterback like a Jalen Hurts, or a player that, hey, listen, like I kind of don't mind this guy in this format because of, say, the completion percentage? Is there somebody that jumps out to you, Brandon?
Just because of the issue with the completion percentage, that is definitely Jalen Hurts is definitely one of them. I'm hoping AJ Brown actually is able to raise his ability to be above that mark, but we'll see. The mobile quarterbacks they don't carry as much weight as what they usually would in a normal super flex, in my opinion. Is that where you guys are tracking as well? Like I don't play Scott Fishbowl. I really don't have any kind of experience in this scoring format or anything like that. But that's who I'm thinking about. Trey Lance is another guy that low percentage, big play guy, mobile quarterback. That's a guy I'm real high on in normal super flex, but in this, probably not. Probably not as high. But I am all like Kyler Murray. Say what you want about Kyler Murray, but his completion percentage is great. That's a mobile guy that has a consistency with completion percentage to be just fine. And I think that's a guy I would really like, to be honest.
Yeah, so real quick on that, Kyler Murray had a 69% completion percentage last year, which was near the top. Joe Burrow was pretty much the leader when it comes to fantasy relevant quarterbacks. Kyler only had 10 interceptions, which I say only, but that's, Josh Allen had 15, Justin Herbert had 15, Matt Stafford had 17. So that's actually a really sharp pick. I mean, obviously Kyler, you don't want to you want to just bake in last year's stats, but he's been consistent. And one of the big things that we like about Kyler is his deep ball completion percentage, right? He had a 50% deep ball completion percentage, and obviously Hop's going to miss the first 6 games, but Marquise
Hollywood Brown,
he's pretty good at that. So I think that's a really sharp pick. And Mike, where did Kyler go in your mock? I'm assuming the first round, but where?
Kyler went. There was a massive QB run in the first round. There were so Kyler went at the 107. 6 of the first 7 picks were quarterbacks. So
do you want to just read that off?
Read it off real quick.
So this first round, it went Allen, Herbert, Taylor, Mahomes, Jackson, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, and then it went Najee, CMC. I picked at 110. I took the first wide receiver off the board in Cooper Kupp, and then Justin Jefferson and Russ Wilson rounded out the first round.
Wow, Russ Wilson is rising on boards, boys. Like I'm seeing it happen. I'm seeing it all over the place. He's moving above Dak in a lot of places, and that's awesome.
Yeah, Dak, and then after that, in the second round, the quarterbacks were Brady, then Hurts, then Stafford, then Dak.
Mm.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense. Everybody's seeing what that makes sense then. I'm all, dude, you know me. You don't have to give me an excuse to draft Kyler Murray. So that's that little Super Mario player can do it all. But he has a high completion percentage, and that is key with these quarterbacks in this kind of a setup for sure.
Absolutely. I have a question for you, gentlemen, and this is for obviously driven for Scott Fishbowl because it's a large tournament style. So you have to assume, like, when you're drafting, you need to maybe take a risk on some of these players, just because you do want to win the tournament at the end. This year, so this year, the first bye week is week 6. Last year, bye week started as early as week 4. So my question to you: we've always been preaching, don't draft players that are injured now, because come bye weeks, come injuries, it's going to be hard. Like, it's hard enough already because players are going to get injured. Why draft somebody who's injured? So Chris Godwin is somebody I'm thinking about. Michael Gallup. We know DeAndre Hopkins has a 6-game suspension. My question to you boys: does it make sense to maybe pivot slightly, just slightly, ever so slightly, our approach on drafting these players based on the fact that, like DeAndre Hopkins, you're going to have an edge where you need to really differentiate yourself because 50% of the field is going to make the playoffs, okay? DeAndre Hopkins can make a major difference weeks 12 through 17 in the playoffs. Does it make sense to maybe draft him a little bit ahead of where you would typically draft him because of the suspension? Simply because, one, we don't start bye weeks till week 6, which means you're not going to necessarily be in bye week hell for an extra couple weeks, right? You've got that extra buffer. And 2, he really does make such a difference. And especially if you go Kyler Murray and you get that stack, because we have seen there's correlation between stacking your quarterbacks and your wide receivers. Does it make sense to but take Hopkins ahead of ADP to get ahead of the field on that and really help differentiate yourself? Because when you do reach, the advantage, I would say, if there was an advantage to reaching, is you're probably going to have a slightly different makeup as a similar team. So does it make sense? Michael, go to you on that one.
In theory, yes. I don't know that I love the Hopkins play, just because I think he was
just
so
an example.
Yeah, no, I know. I was, as soon as you said that, I was thinking somebody like Chris Godwin. He was the one that stuck out. He was the one that stuck out to me. Somebody who's probably going to start the season on PUP, who has rapport with his quarterback, who's in a consistent offense. Hopkins fits those bills, but I just think that Hopkins is going to see a significant volume decline this year, and he was so volume dependent. We kind of saw it at the end of last year. Now, he was playing through something last year, but I think that when you see his volume dip, that to me, that was a little bit of canary in the coal mine, where he needs that volume to be as productive as he was, and he needs that massive target share. Somebody like Godwin is super appealing to me. You could also look at somebody like Michael Gallup, who, now, what you need to worry about, and this is where drafting in the beginning of July is different than drafting in the end of July, beginning of August. We could get into training camp and we could see that Jalen Tolbert is tearing it up, and Gallup's going to end up running as the 3. I could completely see that happening. Or we could get in and say, you know what, Tolbert he looked great in his underwear. He looks absolutely lost in pads running with the first team offense. So Gallup's spot is secure. But I think that, Gallup's still on the board. I'm at the 12-13 turn. Gallup is still on the board. I think at that point he's worth a shot, because you have your starting roster, you have your starting lineup built out, and kind of the way that what I like to do is I like to have my starting lineup set in my mind. Like, as I'm drafting, I know who my weekly starters are going to be. And then I'm trying to build in upside guys, build in backups, build in guys for further down the road. So I think that if you can look at somebody like that, who's going to start on PUP, but has decent production, I think it's a great play.
Where's Godwin going?
Godwin went. Shane and I were talking about this. You were familying it up, but Shane and I were talking about this. Godwin went at the. He went at the 9. He went at 9.1, so right at the 8-9 turn. So I considered him. Yeah, so I was considering him. I was considering either him or Gabe Davis. And actually, for my wide receiver 3, what I ended up doing, I actually ended up taking Thielen as my wide receiver 3.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a mock, which is kind of fun because you guys are going to play it out as a best ball. Do you have any stakes at all? Like, did everybody throw in $10 or something like that?
So this is going to get played out? Nice.
So halfway through the draft, the guy that runs the Discord server was like, "Hey, we're going to play out all of our mock drafts as best balls." So
might as well, right? I mean,
it's
good to play it out.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Would you now that we've kind of had this conversation, and would you reconsider that pick and just go for the upside, go for the win, and take
Uh,
Godwin over Thielen? Or are you still pretty
Godwin.
like? Would you do Thielen again?
no, I think I would probably take Thielen again just because he's my
Mhm.
wide receiver 3. So
Yeah.
something that I did that I don't typically do, I have two premium tight ends. So I
You
took
did.
Kittle. I took Kittle in the 5th, and then I took Goddard in the 7th when he came back around. So because of the bump that tight ends get, I think Goddard's going to be uber productive. I have Goddard
Mhm.
slated in as one of my flexes, but because that left me exposed at my wide receiver spot, I needed to take somebody that I knew would be startable week 1. And to me, that was either Gabe Davis or it was Thielen, or I was considering Tyler Boyd in that spot. Because of Davis's volatility, I kind of took him, I bumped him down a little bit, and then to me it was between Thielen and Boyd, and Thielen being the second option in that offense versus Boyd being the third option in that offense. I hedged Thielen.
Yeah, I think that's a
I mean, the
smart
dude was
play.
wide receiver 27 last year, and he played like crap the last 3 or 4 games. So, I mean, to get him in the 9th round and have that floor built in, I was juiced about that.
Yeah, I mean Adam Thielen. The reports are he's on track to be in training camp next month, which I mean we'll believe it when we see it. He had the ankle injury last year. He had surgery at the end of the season, and look, I mean it's like any of these other players. Assuming he's going to be back, we like him, but there's always that risk factor that maybe he's not healing as well as we thought he would. I think he's 31 years old. Don't have it in front of me, but I believe I was looking at it earlier. He's 31 years old, double-digit touchdowns the last couple of years, built-in rapport. We love Justin Jefferson, but Jefferson's not going to get everything. He ain't going to get everything. I think that's interesting. Question for you. Later on, just looking at the Bengals, Chris Evans was a guy that we kind of liked. He had a minor role last year, but word is he's moving ahead of Samaje Perine on that depth chart, which probably means Perine's a good pass blocker. So Chris Evans, maybe he's improving on that talent. Does it take the luster off a little bit, Joe Mixon, or does Mixon still deserve to be going where it's going? This is a Brandon
So
question.
I just caught a little blurb actually just this week about this situation with the coach talking about the OC of the Bengals talking about it. He talked about Evans becoming more of a pass catching guy, but he also mentioned that he is going to be mixing. He is going to have Mixon run more third downs this year. He wants to have Mixon. He doesn't want to run him down. He said too much volume, but he wants to get him targeted on third downs. So that's different from last year. It seemed like last year they were pulling him on third downs, and for some reason, and I think he heard the outcry in the Super Bowl from the fans going, "Why are you taking Mixon out when you have a stud and putting in Perine or putting in Chris Evans or whatever?" But I think from what the coaches are saying, they want to get him going in the third down more often.
Yeah, I think it's kind of ironic that the reason Perine was in for the last drive was for his pass blocking, and Aaron Donald still went and melt faces because that's what Aaron Donald does. So
you just put the best players on the field, dude.
Yeah.
Like put the best players on the field, period, especially in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of
Pete Carroll.
Oh, dude, I know.
Zing.
Oh man, glad you had to do that. Oh,
yeah. And see, here's the thing, right? So to me, we were talking before the show started today. It's like you can have this analysis or paralysis by analysis, right? By saying, okay, well, because of we get an extra 0.5 points for tight ends because of this, you want to drop here. But to me, it's not so much your player rankings because the players, generally speaking, maybe at the quarterback position, you need to nitpick because of that completion percentage. But to me, it's more about your roster construction versus your actual player rankings, because the player rankings are probably going to be very similar to how you typically rank it. So, Mike, you decided, at least in this mock draft, to fade quarterback. Can you tell us a little bit about such strategy? And also, you got to choose your draft spot. You chose the 11 spot or the 10?
10 spot.
The 10 spot. Give us your thought process on the 10 spot, and then how that tied into your strategy of essentially fading quarterback early.
So looking through at my draft spot, basically what I figured was that I wanted to be kind of on the back end so that I could grab that value. looking at how these drafts have gone in the last couple of years, looking at ADP, and if you go to Dynasty Nerds, it's free to set up an account there. Dynasty Nerds does Scott Fishbowl. They have a lot of Scott Fishbowl data that they run there, and they set up Scott Fishbowl mocks that you can just run on your own. So looking at that, I did a bunch of those last year before I drafted. And I knew that there was going to be a QB run at the top. So I figured if I got towards the back end of round 1, that would give me an elite positional player, either an elite running back or an elite wide receiver. I had a feeling I would end up with my pick of wide receiver. I didn't realize I would have my pick of all the wide receivers. So I ended up taking Cooper Kupp there, and I was stoked about that. And then, on the comeback, I ended up with Derrick Henry. So looking at kind of building out a solid floor, a solid foundation to build the rest of my team on. The Derrick Henry injury didn't really scare me off much. And just looking at how heavy the quarterbacks went early, I figured that eventually the run would cool down, and it did. And I ended up with I took Derek Carr. I ended up taking Derek Carr in the 3rd, which I feel great about. I mean, he was 68% completion rate last year. He got better at wide receiver. He's got a great offensive coach. And if you look at what Mac Jones did last year in that offense, Mac Jones was uber efficient in that offense. His completion rate was great. Derek Carr is a more mature quarterback, a more mature decision maker in a division that's going to shoot out every single week. So I like that pick. And then I punted all the way down. The next quarterback I took off the board went off at QB 22. I took one Daniel Jones. So and part of that was the fact that dude's in a contract year. They didn't pick up his 5th option, so he's playing for his NFL life. The other part of that was, looking at what Daboll did with Josh Allen from year 1 to year 2. He took and we've talked about this. Allen did the work with Jordan Palmer on his own, but Daboll was the architect of that offense. He took Allen up to a 69, 70% completion rate. So with Jones's rushing floor and with the way that offense is going to run with Daboll, with the way that I think it's going to run with Daboll, and then getting Steve Smith as the wide receiver coach there, as an NFC East fan, I'm an Eagles guy. I don't feel great about having them in division, but as somebody who drafts fantasy rosters agnostically, I think that Daniel Jones is a great pick at QB 22. I got him in like the 8th round. And then I'm building out my last quarterback. I took Kenny Pickett, and I'm going to take Trubisky so that I can have the Steelers quarterback for my 3rd QB.
Yeah, I think fair.
It's safe.
What were you going to say,
and then you got a full year with Kadarius Toney, having that it as your guy that's going to be he's Debo light, right? Like, guy has extreme yak ability, and I actually like that a lot. I think DJ is going to have a little bit easier of a time with Daboll running the show. It's not going to be such a shit show. I mean, week to week last year was just, imagine being that quarterback and just seeing the amount of injuries that the Giants had last year. Nobody could be good. And we've seen some spark with him here and there. I mean, he's put up 30-point plus weeks, before very easily because he's got wheels. The guy can run, can move. And then now he's got some real pass catchers with some ability, and he's got a play caller with some creativity. I totally understand that. And like you said, I like contract year players. That is a underutilized actually way to attack a draft, by finding those guys that have to do well. They have to play through the little things. They can't take themselves off the field at all. And that is, I love that. I think that's something that I do as well.
Yeah, I think
not surprised that you do too.
I think that
not surprised.
If you look at a contract year for a player in a vacuum, I think that yes, it does make a difference, but sometimes players just suck. I agree with you boys. I'm not quite out on Daniel Jones. I mean, when you look at what happened last year, it was just a confluence of bad events, right? I mean, Saquon Barkley was hurt. Sterling Shepard had his moments, but he couldn't stay bloody healthy. Kadarius Toney had that massive game. He couldn't stay healthy. And you bake into the fact that this year, I'm not a Kenny Golladay guy, but Kenny Golladay is still around, right? But if Kadarius Toney can take a step forward, Saquon Barkley can stay on the field. They drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, and look, we like Wan'Dale Robinson. He's a dog. I'm not sure you necessarily want to draft him in fantasy this year, but he's still a very good player. And for Daniel Jones, he'll be a nice, safe outlet for him. as a whole, the
Yeah.
Giants should be better this year. And let's call it what it is, guys. The NFC East is wide open this year. I know people are going to say the Dallas Cowboys because, well, them Cowboys. But I mean, really, they can
They
take
got
a step
worse.
forward. Yeah, I think. Look, if it's me, I still think it's going to be between Dallas and Philly for that division, and it's probably going to be the Giants and Washington at the end. But it is up for grabs. They can scale together a few wins, and fantasy points are typically going to follow that because, again, like playing against a team like Dallas, you're going to have to put up points. So it's an interesting pick. I mean, to be honest with you, Mike, it's a little risky, rocking the situation. I mean, we look at the Steelers. I'm kind of a Trubisky apologist, to be honest with you. I think that word is he's going to start, but they're going to pass the ball a ton, and he's not really known for his legs. So you go and you get that passing offense. They're going to be shallow passes to Najee, Deontay Johnson, and then maybe the odd one to Claypool. But they didn't use Claypool deep last year, right? They kept him close to the line.
They couldn't.
I mean, it could have been subject to Ben's arm, but
Ben couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Period.
So I think it's an interesting strategy, and I'm excited for it. One question for you as well, Mike. When you chose the 10 spot, did the fact that it's a third round reversal bake into that at all?
100% it did, because I get an early second round pick, and then I get an early third round pick as well.
That's huge.
That's
huge.
So that's kind of where I'll build the meat of my roster is, and that's where I ended up taking cars in that. Drafting early third round versus late third round is a huge difference. If it had not been the third round reversal, I probably would have tried to get around the 4 spot. Generally, that's where I like to be. If I'm going to be in the front part of the round, that's where I like to be. You still get an elite. If you're going to go quarterback, you still can get either one of either Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, or Herbert. And then if you want to pivot, you definitely will get in a setup like this, you'll definitely get Taylor if you want him.
Yeah. So you're in round 13, you said. From one friend to another, you should seriously consider looking at kicker coming up.
I'm going to take I'm taking McPherson.
You're going to take McPherson.
There you go.
Okay, out of Cincinnati. That's interesting.
Dude, the Bengals, I'm telling you, Bengals are going to explode this year. They were just getting started last year. This offense has so much upside, and they just what happens when T. Higgins is consistent? What happens like that? The TD progression is going to happen for him. I see 45 touchdowns for Joe Burrow this year. I see that happening. And then they got Hayden Hurst, a sleeper at the tight end position, a former first round pick with talent. We'll see if they can get him going. But Tyler Boyd, they're 3 deep, man, and Joe can just sling it, man. He can just do what he wants with that ball, and now he's got protection. So I'm all in on the Bengals this year.
I think Mixon's a top 5 running back easy this year.
There you go. I really believe that. Like, you can't argue against it.
I mean, you could, but I'm not gonna.
How? Yeah. Tell me how. Like, how you get the only thing you can say is injury, but like that's with every running back. Like, that's with everybody.
I said you could. I didn't say I was going to. I said you could. You can argue anything. We've discussed this on the show. Like, literally,
y'all Mixon haters.
Yeah, no, I was last year to my own detriment. But look, guys, I want to keep it short and tight because give the people what they want. But any closing thoughts on Scott Fishbowl, Mike?
No, I think the biggest thing and the best thing about Scott Fishbowl is the charity piece that he has tied into it.
There you go.
Thank you.
He does a ton of stuff with charity. I know at Christmas every year in the host cities, he gives money out, and they just blow out Target. They'll go spend $10,000, $20,000 at Target and give all those toys for tots. I can pull the website up here, see what the charity is. The charity piece really is the biggest piece of what they do. And obviously Scott's a huge guy in the fantasy community, but I really, really like the charity piece of that. So I've seen a lot of leagues start to do this, is where they'll tithe their pot. They'll give 10% of their pot to a charity of the winner's selection. And I think that that's something cool to do. So, as we've been fortunate to grow the fantasy community, with the advent of things like Zoom and StreamYard and platforms like Sleeper, I think that we should consider an aspect like that, giving back to the world writ large, rather than just sitting on our winnings.
Yeah. So his foundation is called Fantasy Cares. Typically, they will diversify where they send their charity. But to be honest, like, so the whole reason Scott does this is for the charity. So there's a podathon that they put on kind of in conjunction the week before. It's 24 hours. It's pretty impressive. It's a bunch of analysts you know and respect talking about fantasy football for the season. They talk about the Scott Fish Bowl, but there's an opportunity. So it's just it's a PayPal that they go, and it's like a PayPal charity that you can set up. You can donate $1, you can donate $100. When we were on the Flex Network, we used to donate every single year. We're probably going to do it again for DFS Army. I got to talk to the geek first, get his blessing. But
Try to have his cold hands.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, but it's a great cause, and I know 2 years ago they specifically donated it to people who were impacted by COVID. I don't recall what they did for last year, but it's usually a good cause. And so at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. So we love talking about the fantasy football aspect of it, but it's about giving back to the community. And man, times are tough right now, man. People are divided, and when you can get something like this that brings people together, and it's a positive thing for the fantasy community, and at the end of the day, it's gonna put money and help people in need, and that's what this is all about. So I'm gonna add the link into the show description so you can go and you can donate if you want. But that's it, man. Have a lot of fun. Even if you're not in it, there's satellite tournaments out there. It's just fun to interact. I mean, it brings the community together, and I'm so happy that you're a part of it, Mike, so that we can really, live vicariously through you. And that's it. So with that, boys, we're going to end it there. Of course, you can follow Brandon on Twitter. He loves talking shit, especially when it's about Joe Mixon and Joe Burrow. At Brandon D. Adam 19. And of course, if you hate Mike's fantasy team, you can go tell him about it at Mike_Dickinson on Twitter. I'm, of course, Shane Steele. You can follow me at the Flex Network 1. So if you like what we're doing here, please subscribe. Please hit that alert button so that you know when we're going live. And hey, hit us up on Twitter. So we'd like to talk about all of our content is over at dfsarmy.com. There's a link in the show description. We've got articles. My draft kit, my fantasy football redraft draft kit's going to be launching in the next week and a half here. So I got my work cut out for me, but it's going to be up shortly. And let us know what you think about my rankings. I tiered everything. If you're like Brandon, you think Gabriel Davis is way too damn low, let me know about it. I probably won't listen to you, but at least I'll know. So with that, we appreciate you guys. So for Brandon, for Mike, I'm Shane, and we are the DFS Army Fantasy Football Show.